Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death, the podcast show where we talk about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. My name is Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and I welcome you to join me as I talk to everyday people with not so everyday experiences. You may also wish to join the conversation on the Let's Talk Near Death Facebook page or access additional VIP content as a premium subscriber via Patreon. For just a couple of dollars a month, you can get an early access to episodes, additional bonus content, and your chance to connect with my guests. To do so, simply visit patreon.com/Kirsty Salisbury. Let's talk near death. Hello, welcome back to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. Today it's just me. Today I have no guest joining me. I have no one else that I'm talking to. And today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my own near-death experience, a little bit about what motivates me to do this podcast, how it all started, and how all of the experiences in my life have put me in a place to be doing what I'm doing today. So I hope that you enjoy my story. And first of all, before I get into that, I want to say a huge thank you. A huge thank you for listening to the podcast, for supporting me. Many people who listen to this send me emails and words of encouragement. There's all the comments on the YouTube channel. There's constant reinforcement that what I'm doing here is making a difference. And that means so much to me because it was never something that I sat down and thought, I'm going to start a podcast about near-death experiences. I also had my own experience, which has taken me a very long time to be able to talk about in this kind of environment. So my experience happened when I was 12 years old, and it took me years and years to come to grips with what had happened. I certainly didn't think I'd be sharing it publicly, and I felt like it was a very personal thing. I felt like there was no need to talk about my experience, that it was something that I had and I didn't need to share it. But as I do this work and as I start to share more and more conversations around both death but also near-death experiences, I'm starting to see how these conversations are making a massive impact in the way that we look and we talk about death. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your support, and I'll share my story with you. Like I said, I was 12 years old. I was your everyday average kid. I possibly had a little bit more energy than some other kids. I was always bouncing off the walls. I was very active. I was a competitive gymnast, and there was no reason to suspect that anything was wrong. But I had an AVM on my brain. So up here on my brain, I had an arterial venous malformation. And what this means in everyday language is that before I was born, my brain hadn't been formed quite right. So it was a little bit malformed. Nothing you could ever see. There was no reason to suspect that anything was amiss. We had no idea. And then I'd been training quite hard in my gymnastics. And I remember being at school and I remember hitting my head on the bars in the playground. You know, you have the bars and you've got the monkey bars and then the climbing frames. And yeah, I hit my head quite hard on the bar and I thought, oh, that really hurt. But I didn't think anything of it. But it was about 2 days later on a Wednesday. Now I had a gymnastics competition on the Saturday and I was really starting to get somewhere in my competing. So I was very, very excited about that. But on the Wednesday before my competition on Saturday, I felt really tired. And I didn't remember hitting my head on the bar. It wasn't that I associated the two things together. We will actually never know whether they're connected or not. However, I went to bed nice and early that night thinking I need to get some sleep, get ready for my competition that was coming up. And I fell asleep really quickly. And I was oblivious that anything was about to change. But then a couple of hours later in the night, I woke up and I had this headache right here that was beyond any kind of pain I had ever felt in my life. I'd never broken any bones. I'd never done anything too drastic, but this pain was so specific and so painful. And I knew that something was really about to change. And I can remember lying in my bed as a 12-year-old, and the room was dark and everything was quiet. And I remember thinking, that pain is right there. It was a pinpoint pain and it was so bad, but I didn't know what to do about it. And then I thought, oh no, I'm going to be sick. So I thought, I've got to get out of bed and I've got to go and find the bathroom. And so I tried to get out of bed and I collapsed on the floor, big lump on the floor, and I couldn't do anything to move. And I realized that actually my body wasn't working. So I had this headache, I was feeling sick, and I was lying on the floor. And I can remember getting out of bed and pulling on the bedpost with one hand and trying to pull myself back up into bed, and then collapsing on the floor, and then trying again and trying again. At which point my mother then came into the room and she said, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I don't know. She got me up, and from then on in, she looked after me, which was amazing. But I remember this headache, and I remember she took me into our spare room. So she took me into the big double bed in the spare room where she could look after me and help me. And she thought I just had a migraine, and I was a little bit sick from a migraine because I was saying my head hurt. And I remember we lay down on the bed and she went off to sleep, and I was thinking to myself, what's going on? And then I got really tired, like incredibly tired, so tired that I just couldn't fight it. And I heard this voice say to me, don't go to sleep. But it wasn't my mother's voice, and it wasn't a voice that I recognized. And I thought, what do you mean, don't go to sleep? I'm so tired. I just want to close my eyes. And the voice was adamant, don't go to sleep. And I fell asleep. It was too hard to fight. I fell asleep. And that was pretty much me from that point in the physical world. I went into a coma. In the morning, my parents could not wake me up. So I got rushed off to hospital. I'm kind of giving you the abbreviated version here, but bear with me. I got rushed off to hospital and straight into the operating theatre where I had brain surgery. So nobody knew what was wrong at this point, but when they opened me up, they did a CAT scan, CT scan. They did some tests on things, and they realized that I had this AVM on my brain. So what had happened is the blood flow had been restricted and the pressure had built up on my brain. And it had built up so much that actually the blood vessels had burst, and then my brain was bleeding. So I was having a brain hemorrhage. I had a stroke, which is why I was lying on the floor and I wasn't able to move my body properly. It was because now my left side was completely paralyzed. And they were operating on me, trying to get this malformation fixed, and they were putting in some little clips, aneurysm clips, and different things in my brain to help me to get back to where I could live again. So I'm on the operating table, and the last thing I remember was hearing this voice in the spare bedroom saying, don't go to sleep. Next thing I know is that I'm in this place of pure darkness. Not darkness in a negative way. It was just a space of nothing. It was black and it was silent and it was just empty. There wasn't even darkness there. It was just an absolute place of nothingness. And I remember thinking, this is really strange. My NDE was pretty confusing, if I'm honest. I'm in this place where it's just very, very confusing. There's nothing around me. And I'm wondering, where am I? What is going on? And then I can hear a voice. And this time I recognize the voice. This time the voice is from my father. My father was alive at the time. So that's a very interesting thing that if you've been listening to my podcast, you know that I love to talk to people who have had experiences with living people in them. So I can hear my father's voice, but I can't see him and I can't connect with him. And it's like he was a million galaxies away, just so far away. And yet he was in my ear and he was in my head and he was just behind me. So I couldn't see him. He was in my ear, but so far away at the same time. And he was saying to me, can you squeeze my hand? Let me know you're going to be okay. And I thought, well, this is weird, but okay. So I went to squeeze his hand and I couldn't do it. And I couldn't find my body. It was the strangest thing because when we're in our body in this dimension, we know where our hands are, we know where our body parts are, and it's pretty much a brain signal. We just need to send the brain signal from the head to the body part to do the action. But there I had the brain signal and I was trying to squeeze a hand, but I couldn't find a hand. I couldn't physically move. Now, in hindsight, I realized that I quite possibly didn't have a body But at that point, I didn't feel any different to what I do right now. I felt like I was a being of some sort. I was alive. I wasn't aware of my body, but I wasn't not aware of my body. And so I was trying to squeeze my father's hand and I couldn't. And I thought, oh, well, no big deal. But then he started to get a bit desperate with me. And he was saying, please, you've got to squeeze my hand. And I was thinking, why? Why is this so important to him? And he started to plead with me and he started to beg with me. And I could hear this desperation in his voice. And this is where I always thought that my NDE was a little bit crazy and that I maybe had a little bit of a big head. It's a bit embarrassing because what came out of that was this need to actually save somebody or something. It was like if I didn't squeeze his hand, the rest of, call it life, being, the universe, I don't know to what degree, but something significant would not be okay forever. I felt this really weighty level of responsibility that if I didn't squeeze his hand, then that was going to have this major impact and that it was essential that I squeezed his hand. And so I'm looking for my hand and I'm trying to squeeze his and I can't do it. So I come up with this idea, this thought jumps into my head that I've got to give everything, kind of like a martyr, which again sounds very big-headed. I need to die for this. So I decided that I was going to die. I was going to put every ounce of energy that I had into squeezing his hand to save whatever it was that needed saving. Like I say, my NDE was quite confusing. I didn't have a lot of clarity and I still don't. So I decided to put everything into it and I braced myself. And I remember saying to myself, well, this is it. This is life about to finish. I'm about to die. I'm going to sacrifice myself to squeeze his hand for whatever greater being needed to happen. And I did a little countdown, 3, 2, 1, and I braced myself. And then I threw every bit of energy I had into squeezing his hand. And it was almost like there was a little twitch. I'm not quite sure where that came from because, like I say, I couldn't quite connect with my hand or his hand. I couldn't physically feel his hand. Now, I never saw him either. I recognized him. I recognized him in a different universe and inside of me, so close to me, almost a part of me. So there was this little twitch thing that happened. And then there was this bright white light. And it was like a booming, silent white light. It was indescribable. And suddenly I was up and I was in this place of magnificent white light. And there was cheering and there was clapping and there was so much love and just these overwhelming feelings of acceptance, of love, of welcome. And it was just incredible. I still didn't know where I was. I still hadn't had time to process any of my thoughts. I didn't really have clear thoughts. I was kind of just going through the experience and taking it as it came to me. And when I was in this white light and I realized these feelings of celebration and welcome and love, I then noticed that there were beings all around me. Now, I got the feeling that there were thousands of beings, but directly around me were probably around 7 or 8. And so my natural instinct was to look at them and to try to work out who they were, because I felt like I connected with them. I felt like they were not necessarily familiar, but they were on my side, part of my team. They were there for me and they loved me and they supported me. And as I tried to look at them, they had no features. They had no dimension. They were almost 2D silhouettes. And yet they were so alive and they were so vibrant and so loving. And so they were around me directly, but I got the feeling that there were thousands of people beyond them and that they were on the edge of this amazing feeling that was coming from somewhere else. And so I was in this place of pure white light, of love, of happiness, of joy. And I was just starting to settle in. I can't say how long I had my NDE for. I suspect it was quite short. It's really hard to say when you're in this type of environment. So anyway, I'm around these beings and I'm thinking, this is great. And then just like that, I was waking up from a coma. So at no point in my NDE did I realize that I had died. No point did I understand what was going on. I didn't have any comprehension of what was happening. I don't remember leaving my body. I don't remember coming back to my body. But I do remember waking up from my coma, and this was, oh, don't quote me on this. I'd like to say 5 days later. I need to go through my medical records to find out how many days later, but I was waking up from my coma. And I woke up and I was in the hospital bed and I was in the critical care unit and I had tubes everywhere. And I woke up and the nurses rushed over and they could barely believe that I was awake. And they were happy and they were celebrating, but it was nothing like the celebration I just experienced. And I remember thinking, no, I don't want to be here. This isn't right. Take me back to where I was. I don't want to leave there. I want to go back to the party. And there was nothing that could take me back. And I had the tubes everywhere and I was thinking, well, I don't need these. And the nurses were there. They were trying to tell me everything that had happened. But I knew everything that had happened. I knew absolutely everything. I knew that I'd been through this major illness. And actually, as I look back over my life, I think I always knew that this was going to happen. I didn't talk about that very much. I kind of just held that to myself and thought, oh, that's a little bit weird. You don't really expect to get really sick or have some major thing happen. But as I woke up from my coma, it was like all the pieces fitted back into place. It all made sense. And I understood everything that had happened. I didn't understand the detail. So if they'd asked me what's happened, I couldn't say I had an AVM on my brain. I couldn't say exactly what had happened. But what I knew was that everything was exactly as it should be. Everything was perfect in my life. And I knew that I was okay. There was going to be no more danger. I knew that I would heal very quickly. And I knew that everything was perfect. So I'm starting to try and pull these tubes out of my nose and they're everywhere. I've got wires and tubes everywhere. And I'm saying to them, get them out. I don't need them. And they're all trying to keep them in me, saying, look, you don't realize you've been very, very sick. I was thinking, why are they telling me this? Everybody knows this. It's common knowledge. Why are they trying to tell me? And why are they treating me like I'm a little bit stupid? Was what I was thinking. I had no idea that I potentially shouldn't have known what had happened. I shouldn't know what I knew. So the next thing was my parents they got the news that I'd woken up out of the coma and they were getting in the car and I could see them getting in the car, but I was in the hospital. And then the nurse came in and said, great news, your parents are almost here, they're on their way. And again, I was thinking, why are you treating me like I'm stupid? Why are you telling me this? Of course they are, I can see them. But how I could see two things in two places at one time, well, who knows, right? So anyway, I knew what had happened. I knew I was going to be okay. And they were trying to tell me everything that I knew. So this got a little bit frustrating. But then what was really interesting was when my parents arrived and the doctors came in to see me with my parents, they then started to explain a little bit more about the surgery. So I'd had my near-death experience on the operating table having emergency brain surgery. And they said that they got me in for brain surgery, but they'd lost me on the table. So basically I'd flatlined and they had resuscitated me. And this is all in my medical notes, which was so amazing to find out years and years later when I requested my notes, because I'd kind of always wondered, did that really happen? Even though it felt so real and so incredible, and I've never forgotten it. I actually wondered, because I've got a little brain injury now, very small because my healing was amazing. But I did wonder as well if I'd kind of imagined something or created a story in my brain through this experience. So when I got my medical notes years and years later, and it said that I had flatlined and that they had resuscitated me, it made me feel so validated. So they'd got me back. They hadn't fixed the problem in my brain. And then they tried again because the problem wasn't fixed. And it was very unlikely that I'd survive if they didn't continue with the surgery. So they tried again, and second time they lost me on the table. Now, I don't remember two experiences. I only remember one. So I guess there's no knowing whether it was the first time that I died or the second time that I died. But they ended up aborting my surgery. They said, it's too dangerous. We will not make it through. She will not survive if we continue with the surgery. So they'd managed to get a little clip in there, and they'd managed to get most of the problems sorted. And so that was really great. So I woke up, and so I had this surgical scar, and I had a left side that was paralyzed, and physically things looked really grim. Things looked really terrible. But I knew that everything was fine. I knew I'd be absolutely okay, and I'd live a normal life, and that I just had to get on with it. So the next little while was in hospital, and that was really quite life transforming for me, because I was now reliant on everybody else for everything, from feeding myself, moving, going to the bathroom, anything like that. I had one good side, my right side, which worked perfectly. And then I had the side that did nothing. And it was a process of learning how to get that movement back. We didn't know whether I'd get the movement back. Doctors didn't know how much, if any, I would get back. And I was absolutely determined. I knew I was going to be okay. Part of me didn't know whether being okay meant that I'd be okay, but I'd be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life, or whether I'd be okay, but I'd have all of these other health issues the rest of my life. I didn't know at what point I'd be okay, but I knew that my life was going to be fine, and that this was part of my journey. This was what I'd signed up for, and I'd be fine. Now I'm so happy, so grateful, thankful. My heart is just full, because my healing was very quick, incredibly quick. And like I say, I was really determined, but I put in a lot of effort, and people always credit that my healing comes back to my attitude and my determination. But I got back to the point where I was given this gift where I could actually walk again. And I could, as you can tell, I can talk, and some would say I talk quite a lot. Just ask my husband. But I have got most of the feeling back in my left side. I then went on a whole nother journey, and this is a whole nother story, but then went through a phase where I had to prove life to myself, and I had to prove my mobility. I ended up becoming a personal trainer. I'm very active. I'm in the gym pretty much every day. I do some CrossFit, and I do some gymnastic style stuff, because my dream was always to be a gymnast, and who says you can't do that as an adult, right? So I'm still following my dreams. I have a very amazing life. I'm able to do all the things that they said I probably wouldn't do. So I can drive a car, I can live in a house. I've got a gorgeous little girl. And that was a whole nother thing. They said, you don't even try to have kids. It was an interesting experience. I've done it once. I don't need to go through that again. But I have this amazing, incredible life, and I'm so grateful for how this has all come about. So that was my near-death experience. It then took me 27 years to talk about it, because I didn't feel a need to talk about it. It was so personal. And like I said, I thought that I'd developed some kind of brain thing through my brain injury. I thought that maybe I'd exaggerated what happened, created some kind of story, but still the memories are so real to me. So I kept it to myself. I didn't feel the need to talk about it. I may have mentioned it to my family, to my mother or someone occasionally, but it wasn't a topic of conversation, and it wasn't something that I was openly talking about. I didn't talk about my illness either. So when I was 12, I obviously had my friends around me. I had high school. I missed quite a bit of school because I'm jumping all over. I do apologize. Because they had aborted my surgery, I still had a problem in my brain. So they'd fixed the problem, but it wasn't completely fixed. So then I was actually diagnosed as a walking time bomb, that the whole thing could happen again. And so I had the clarity that my life was okay, that I would be okay. But I also had the voices of doctors and of experts and of specialists saying, you're a walking time bomb. This can all happen. Don't do anything physical. Don't move fast. So we were talking to a competitive gymnast who bounced off the ceiling, was always moving, always active. and being told that I couldn't do anything to raise my blood pressure. I couldn't do anything to raise my heart rate, and I had to keep my head upright at all times. You tell that to a 12-year-old kid, that's pretty hard to do. And so I spent then another year where I wasn't allowed to do anything because I couldn't raise my heart rate. I couldn't do anything to get the blood flow pumping, because then that would possibly trigger the whole thing to happen all again. And they'd said, look, if we go in again, that's it, we will lose her. This will not work. So there was that to get through. I ended up flying over to England and having some surgery there. It was very scary at the time because it was the very beginning of this type of treatment. It was stereotactic radiation therapy. And today it's probably quite common. I know that a lot of people have had gamma knife surgery, and where they get laser beams and they nuke the problem area, it dissolves and then it floats out through the body systems. But back in, gosh, by the time I got my surgery, I was about 13, and we're talking 1991, I think. My maths is not so good. Plus, I feel a lot younger than I actually am. So at that point, that was terrifying. I had to fly over the other side of the world. To get on a plane, they didn't even know whether I'd survived the plane trip, because flying and the compression in the plane, we didn't know what that would do to my head, the altitude, all of these types of things. So I faced death. Well, I faced the possibility of death time and time again. And I can't say it ever got easier, but it became, well, if that's my time, that's my time. I still hadn't connected that the experience I had was because I died. And it seems so logical and it seems so obvious, but I think I shut down a part of that because I was afraid to accept what had happened. It was so personal. So I went over to the UK and I had this extra surgery over there, and it was a success, which was just amazing, because I know people who had it where it wasn't a success, or their type of aneurysm or whatever they had. Mine was an AVM, but whatever problem they had in their brain, the surgery didn't suit that. So I went over, I had this, and then I got the all clear a couple of years later. So in that time, I was learning how to walk, how to talk, how to move my arm, my hand, my leg, how to do all of these things. And I was dreaming of being a gymnast. I was dreaming of getting back outside and running and jumping and doing all these amazing things. So that was my experience. Then I had a couple of years of recovery, which was interesting. I wasn't completely unable to do things in that time. You'd be surprised, but actually I'm still surprised how quickly I got to the point where I could walk around, where I could do things for short amount of times, then have a rest, and then do things. I had a wheelchair, but I refused to use it. And I said that I'm not going back to school until I can walk enough to get to my classroom. So my goal was constantly to learn to walk, to improve my situation, to do the next thing. And I very much today live by a 1 degree of change concept, which I had back then as a 12-year-old. And that was the smallest amount of change in our life. That 1 degree of change can take us to an entirely new destination if we can maintain that level of change. And so I was always looking for the next tiny thing I could do in my life and how I could get that, and then the next tiny thing, the next tiny thing. And I think it's just been amazing that over time, we're talking about nearly 30 years now, where those 1 degree of changes has actually changed everything for me and put me in a place where I'm thriving in life. I have this amazing life, amazing family. I do lots of fun things. I've got great friends. It's all really great. And we look back to when I was lying in that hospital bed and they were saying, we don't know if she'll make it. They were surprised when I woke up and didn't know what the outlook for my life would be like. So I'm so grateful. My heart is full. And then it comes on to, why am I doing this podcast? This is the other question that I get from my guests. Why are you doing this? It comes up every episode when I talk to people. We chat a little bit before and afterwards. They say, tell me why you're doing this. So I had no intention to run this podcast. I had no intention to share my story, no intention to talk about near-death experiences. But I was always really curious about them. And it was interesting when I realized what I had had. That took quite a few years. And there was a guy named Ian McCormick. If you haven't listened to the episode of him, you can go back and have a listen. He's a New Zealander as well. And he got stung by some box jellyfish. And he had this near-death experience. And I would have been probably about, it's hard to remember, probably about 16 years old. And I heard of his story. And I heard about how he had his near-death experience. And I thought, oh, that's what I had. I had something just like that. And then that just sparked this amazing curiosity in me to learn more about these experiences, because I hadn't thought too much about it since then. Like, I'd thought about it and I remembered it, and I tucked it away. I filed it away quite nicely in my brain, in my life. It wasn't something at the forefront because I thought that I was a little bit crazy. And then when I heard his experience, I thought, that's what I had. And I thought, I wonder how many other people have had them. And so I started to research. This is pre-internet times. So I started to look for books. I started to find other people, but it was very, very hard. And I live in New Zealand, where we only have 4 million people in the entire country. I didn't know anyone else who had had this experience. So it was always there. I began to become quite hungry for information about these experiences. I wanted to learn more, research more. And then when the internet came and when Facebook came and all these groups started popping up, I started to delve into them and think about everything that I was reading. And that's when it really gave me the clarity that, yes, I'd had one of these experiences. I had the medical documentation to prove it or to back it. And that I wasn't actually crazy, that it was all completely real, and that it was okay to accept what had happened to me. So it took me 27 years to talk about my illness. I moved on from high school. I went off to do other things, went traveling, made new friends. Nobody knew what had happened to me. Nobody knew that I had this experience. And it was weighing on my heart, and I wanted to be able to be free to talk about it. I wanted to talk about my journey. I wanted to talk about everything I'd been through so that I could heal, because all I'd done to heal was tuck it under the mat. I'd hidden it away where nobody could access it, where it wasn't in my life. And I wanted to have the freedom to be able to express this amazing thing happened to me, and to heal through my journey and be able to come to grips with all of the stuff that had happened through my illness, because there was a lot that went on there, not just the near-death experience stuff. There was the physical stuff, there was the friendship element, the social element, the healing, the travel, the surgery. There was so many levels to it. And so I started to need to want to talk about this. And I'd said to my husband, I said, I need to talk about this. I need to start to come out with it. And he said, okay, that's great. Because obviously I told him, because I don't think you can marry somebody and not share this type of childhood plus experience that you've been through. So he was very supportive of me sharing it. But I couldn't find the guts in me to actually get out and do it. And then I finally did come out. I hired a coach. I came out with my story. The coach helped me to release it to the world and tell people and become public about it. Now I'm only talking about my illness side of things. I never talked about my NDE at this stage. And so that was all very scary, but it came out and it was great. And I experienced the most amazing freedom in my life. Everything from that point on changed, and it was amazing. And I still hadn't shared my near-death experience. But by this time, I was in some Facebook groups, and I was starting to learn just how common they were and how many other people had had them and the similarities. And I'd started to take note of all the patterns and the things that I was seeing in these stories. And then one day I was driving my car. Out by the city, and I'd been reading some NDE experiences the morning before, and I'd been thinking about them a lot during the day. And then I'd just carried on with life. So I'd been out shopping, I was driving my car, and I was coming home by myself, and I felt this download come, almost like a voice. And it was saying to me, go and share near-death experiences. And I freaked out. I totally freaked out, because this was not on my radar. This was not something that I felt needed to be done in the world. And why me? But do you know this voice? I recognize this voice now. It's a much higher being than me. It's a voice that I know eventually will be obeyed, because it's been an active part of my life time and time and time again. And so the voice came and spoke to me, go and share near-death experiences. And I freaked out. And I remember driving just a little bit further down the road, and my mind's on overdrive, and I'm thinking, right, how do I get out of this? What can I do? How can I say no? How can I sabotage this so it doesn't happen? And then I went, okay, great. I could pull together a little survey, and I could send out a survey to the one person in the world that I know who's had a near-death experience. And that would be enough. That would tick off that goal. And then the voice came back again, and it said, no, I want spoken, audio, video experiences. So of course I freak out again. And I'm going, I don't even know anyone. Where on earth would I start? And then it became blinding obvious to me that I started in the Facebook group. So I then went home. I freaked out about it, but I knew that I'll eventually run away from it, come right back to what it's doing, and I'll do it anyway, because I know this voice very clearly now. So I waited for my husband to come home, and we did the whole, hello, how was your day type thing. We chatted through our days, and then I said, oh, actually, there is something. Now my husband knows what I'm like. And he said, okay, what is it? What's the next thing? And I said, I feel like I've got a bit of a call to do spoken interviews about NDEs. And he just laughed and he said, of course you do. And so that freaked me out even more. And then he said, how are you going to do it? And I said, well, I don't know. All I know is that there are podcasts out there, and I know that I can record and I could release some really low quality videos, and I'll work it out as I go. So he said, okay, go for it. So then I felt like I had the call, I had the validation from my husband, I had a laptop, and I had some $8 headphones. So I don't have technical gear. I've got the bare minimum, and it seems to work okay for me. So I then went to Facebook and I put up a little post, and I said something along the lines of, I feel a bit of a call to share these experiences. Don't know what I'm doing. I'm a bit nervous. Would anybody be prepared to share their experience with me on a podcast interview? And I got back 8 responses straight away. And then I really got scared. Then I was like, wow, okay, we're really doing this. This is happening. I have no clue what I'm doing. I didn't even know how to do it. But I thought, okay, I'll just go ahead. I'll learn as I go, and we'll see what happens. And I thought I'll do those 8, and then that'll be the end of that. And then check, I'll follow the voice. But by the time I'd done those 8, I then had other requests coming in. By the time I'd done them, there were others. And then I'd meet people. And then this thing just grew its own legs and started to run away. It was just amazing. So that's how the Let's Talk Near Death podcast got started. It wasn't my idea. I am so happy that it is what it is. It has blessed me so much, because I have spoken and met with the most amazing people. I've heard the most incredible stories. I've been connected with people all over the world. I'm now connected with IANS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies, and running a local IANS group here in Auckland in New Zealand. My network is just beautiful. It's amazing, the people that I have in my life. And it's all come back to me driving my car and hearing a voice and being scared and knowing that I had to do it anyway. So my heart is full. I have gratitude, and I'm so, so happy that I was chosen to do this work. And so that's why I do the podcast. It's not something that I have much clarity around. I've worked with different people, and they've said, okay, I want to know, what are your goals? What are your download numbers? What is this? What's your strategy? You know, going through all the business side of things. And I literally go, I don't know. I don't know how many downloads I get. I don't know what the strategy is. All I know is that I meet people every week who want to come on the show. And then I'm having the time of my life, and I'm learning so much. And the biggest part is that I feel like I've satisfied that call to do the podcast. And that makes me happy. So I have just talked at you for a very long time. I've shared my experience. I've shared why I do the podcast. I'd love to know if you have any other questions for me. I'm very happy to come on and continue this conversation. In terms of after effects, It's an interesting one. I've always felt very spiritual. My mother would say I'm psychic. I don't necessarily believe so, but I've definitely felt a very strong connection with spirit, with God, with higher source, being whatever you want to put the label on as. I feel that. I feel a very, very strong sense of purpose. So coming back, I knew that I was back for a reason, that if I didn't have a purpose for my life, I would have died. Now people say to me, okay, so what's your purpose? And if I'm utterly honest, I still don't know. But what I do know is that I put one foot in front of the other, and every day I look to God, look to source, power, being, say, what am I meant to do today? What is it that is the call on my life today? What do you want me to do this week? What are we aiming for this year? I'm pretty anti-goals. I'm pretty anti-structure and being stuck into things, because my path is like this. My world zigs and zags all over the place. People want plans from me. I can't tell you. I can't tell you which country I'm going to live in a year's time. I don't know what life will look like in 6 months, but I'm grateful for every single day that I have here on earth. I long to go back. I long to have that experience again. But I believe I came back with a very strong life purpose. I believe that life is for living to the absolute full. And that doesn't mean going and trying every experience under the sun. To me, to live life to the full is to follow that call, of purpose. What is my life for? Why am I here? How does my life impact others? Let's live well and let's die well. So I believe that dying well is a bit of a process. Today, I do a little bit of death coaching. I do a little bit of life coaching. And people say to me, how can you do them? They're literally the opposites. And I say, well, they're the opposites of the same coin. So one is all about living life to the full, and one is all about dying well and leaving things the best place that we can when we do go. I've also written this book, which is A Life by Design, How to Design Your Best Future Regardless of Your Current Circumstances. So this goes through my experience. There are a few details in here that I possibly missed out as I'm talking to you today. That goes through my experience, my illness, the NDE, things that I learned, and the way that I got from where I was back then to where I am today. And it's the most beautiful journey. It talks about my family life. It talks about death, conversations, and how we can actually get the most out of life. Because I don't want to give up any opportunities. I want to live life to the absolute full, get to the end, have no regrets, and think, yes, I did it. I want to slide in sideways. I don't want to arrive all prim and proper and tidy and clean. I want to live life to the full, show up on the other side, having sucked the juice out of this life. I hope you've enjoyed this. Many, many more episodes to come. I've got some amazing guests lined up. I've got quite a few interviews already recorded, just waiting for editing. But this is a great way to kick off 2020, and I trust that you'll join me for the rest of the year. Please tell your friends about it. I really want to change the way that we look at death and change the conversation around death. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your ongoing support. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast show. If you've enjoyed it, please share it with your friends, tell people about it. I'd love to get these messages out there. Don't forget you can also pick up your VIP access pass for additional content at patreon.com/Kirsty Salisbury. You can connect with us via the Let's Talk Near Death Facebook page, and I look forward to catching you for another episode soon.